Hello everyone, and welcome to another Star Trek Online video. So today I'm going to take a look at the Winter Anniversary ship, a new Fek'Ihri science ship called the Vok'Tar, and we are here in the Talia. This is, I think, a very good looking ship, and it has green flames instead of the usual red one you associate with the Fek'Ihri ships. There is also sort of this new skin here, the Fek'Ihri Type 4, but you can switch to the Type 3 if you prefer the older look. Keep in mind though that the fires are still going to be green, so there is that. Other than that, you can of course use here the older skins if you prefer. And of course you can any point to put some pattern on this if you prefer and change it up a bit color wise if you want. So overall, honestly, a pretty good looking ship. There are all window options. Well, there are exactly two. There are, well, red ones, and the standard ones would be more like yellowish. Of course, you can also put some vanity ships on, vanity shields on this, and there are some pretty good looking ones. So there is that. Why don't we hop into space? So the first thing, and this comes as a little bit of a warning, is these engines, like those engines, they are very bright, especially if you go full impulse. So if you look at this, you might need sunglasses if you travel anywhere in this ship at full impulse. So you have been warned. And then of course, if you go out from full impulse, those fires are still like really. And if you slow down, of course, they are a bit more measurable. And then if you stand still, then it looks. And one more thing that I want to show you is you can put like the, well, you can put vanity shields on there, but the Baul vanity shield I think is the best looking one on here. Like, I do think those dark hull materials there work really nicely with the green effects then here illuminated in blue. The engines stay like the usual green, but I think this is my favorite look for this ship personally. Then again, I don't own all the vanity shields, so there is that. But there are probably some videos out there where somebody compares them. Anyway, enough about the looks, let's talk about the ship itself. This is a temporal science vessel, and as you might have already spotted here on my screen, you have the temporal mechanics there, where you can fire the, well, you can enter a mode like the support configuration, the defensive configuration, or the offensive configuration, and then you get counters and fire your destruction beam. I'm usually completely ignoring this mechanic. I don't know, I don't think it's impactful or strong enough. Also, the bonuses here are usually not something I do want to bother with. I mean, you could say this is a science ship, so why don't you go support configuration, which gives you 20% more exotic damage. However, I'm also doing weapon damage with this, although this is very much a science build. But let's talk about the build itself here for a moment. So I'm using dual beam banks in the front, and then I'm using 2 omni beams and the cutting beam in the back. Now you could easily use 6 beam arrays, and there is this new trait, twinkling lights, from the winter event. Keep in mind the winter event is over, but you can still access the store if you want. If you go to the events window, there is an event store button here that's here at any time. And then if you still have the currency, you can still buy stuff. So if you still have a stack of those currencies, you can buy anything in the shop that you want, and you can also buy those currencies in the exchange. So even if you're out, you could some from other people. Anyway, back to the trait, Twinkling Lights, and this essentially gives enemies a resistance debuff, and it's all damage resistance, right? So this resistance debuff doesn't just help your weapons, but it also helps your exotic powers, because it's an all damage resistance debuff. However, the debuff is only applied with the weapons of the standard damage types, so Phaser, Disruptor, Tetrion, Polaron, Plasmid, Anti-Proton. So you can already see, if we go back to the ship, I do have the Pavan Omni here, and the Pavan Omni is not applying a debuff. However, it is such a strong Omni Beam that I still feel like I want to run it instead of another one, but you could easily replace that with a different damage type. And that means I only have 4 damage types, because you can only mount 2 Omnis in the back, so I have the Cutting Beam here, which also does not apply a debuff. So instead, you could just do 6 normal beam arrays, then you have all 6 basic damage types and you get the maximum of debuff. However, a lot of science abilities are more like focused on the front of your ship. So if you wanna like launch a gravity well or so, you can see it has a reasonable angle, right? A gravity well, but it's still like more front facing. I have the flamethrower console here on the Breath of the Dragon, which is definitely like a forward cone. So it's just that the abilities are more, like the science abilities are more forward facing, so I want forward facing weapons, so I went for dual beam banks and Omnis in the back. But you can do that however you want. Now I'm using 2 pieces of the Revolutionary set. That is an old event set that's in the MUDS store, because of the science bonuses on it and the 2-piece set bonus, which gives exotic critical severity, I should say. I'm also using 2 pieces of the Discovery set for the, once again, for the 2-piece set bonus. This time it's a passive one that regenerates your hull. So this is like 2 pieces of my set are defensive and the other 2 are offensive in a way. And then the secondary deflector is a deteriorating one, because the damage over time from that deflector is pretty nice. Now let's go to the consoles. Now this ship is using a lot of universal consoles. I'm using the Proton Eruptor from the Klingon Dyson Science Destroyer. I'm using a Delphic Tear that is relatively cheaply available in the exchange. I'm using the console from this ship itself, the Eye of Grapho. It's a pretty fun console. The Dragon's Blood Flame Reactor is from an old event ship, also available in MUDS. The Custom Power Matrix is from last year's winter event. Actually, the 2024 winter event, let's put it like this, right? Okay, anyway. Then the Fleet Power Network is from a Sensor ship, the Avani. I'm using the Assimilated Module, which is from the Reputation. I'm using a Cranium Chronophage, also available in the exchange, exotic particle field exciter with a Control X mod, so this gives me some particle gen and some control expertise. This is a crafted console. The particle conversion matrix is from the Sensor from the Guardian Cruiser. The subspace fracture tunneling field, that is from the Woven Obelisk carrier, also in MUDS right now, or if you have it from the event. Then I'm using the DPRM, that is a very powerful console from, was the promo ship, or I have that from a MUDS pack. But this is very expensive and could easily be replaced with something else. It's mostly there because it helps you survive, but honestly, good replacement would be the flagship console. I always forget the name, but there is a flagship console that also gives some resistance. It's not quite as good, but it is a suitable replacement. Or you could just run any console you like, honestly. And then I have Lorcas for the set piece. Like, you know, this, as I should always give the disclaimers, my sets are not the absolute meta perfected setups or anything like that, but they are all more than elite capable, and it's just what I like to run in a sense, right? Because this is what I think a very fun build. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about traits. Now, I've already touched on twinkling lights, which I'm using to debuff resistances. I also have particle manipulator, which is a very important trait for science builds because it gives a lot of critical hit chance for your exotic abilities and some crit severity. Then I have intelligence agent attaché, which helps reduce the cooldowns of captain abilities. Unconventional systems is an absolutely must-have, I guess, for a build where you want to spam consoles. Now this is a lockbox trait. And Boimler is here to manage cooldowns, and Boimler is something you can get for low buy. And then I'm running some other stuff like Fragment of AI Tech is of course a very nice trait because it gives you control expertise. It's also from a lockbox. Harmonic Shield Link, which is a pretty good trait to help you regenerate shields and is very underrated and often very cheap in the exchange, but I haven't monitored prices in a while, right? The other stuff isn't all that important. There is Whole Lotta X for another defensive trait and Platif Shell and Fireball Escape. But the really crucial traits would obviously be like Boimler, Unconventional Systems, Particle Manipulator, which is simply you get this by leveling your science crafting to 15. This is essentially free. And Twinkling Lights is obviously a nice one, and you can get that fairly cheaply. If you like, the winter event is now over, so if you didn't farm the resources during the event, you can still get those resources in the exchange, and the trade itself is also still sold in the exchange. But let's talk about the Starship traits. So here I'm using Spore-Infused Anomalies, which is a nice science trait to have if you build around it. Now, Spore-Infused Anomalies is one of those abilities that only really shines if you fully commit to it. I've run this on a, like, if you only have a few anomalies or so on, it falls off pretty bad, but if you commit, it's beautiful, I should say. But this is a trait where I don't run it on my more weapon-focused science builds, let's put it like this, but in a almost pure science setup that I have here, it's nice. Then I'm running Improved Gravity Well, which essentially gives me a permanent gravity well. It's a trait that I like. It's not the strongest out there, but it's a fun one. And isn't that what counts? I'm running 5 magics, which helps some science damage and also some disruptor damage, which I don't use that much because it's mostly rainbow. I have the Particle Fluctuation Analysis trait, great trait from the legendary Nebula. And I say this very often, but when you look at this trait, you don't have to keep it up all the time. You don't have to reach 10 stacks. Even if you only have like 5 stacks, the bonuses are already pretty nice. And even if they are not always active or so on, this is just a nice trait, and keep in mind it buffs your team as well, right? This is a trait that is very powerful, and if you really optimize for it and can keep it up permanently, is insanely good. But even if you just like, as long as you spam quite a few consoles, this is a worthy trait to have, honestly. Anyway, Ruin of Our Enemies, that's a very expensive trait, but I happen to have that on account-wide unlock, so I put it essentially on everything. Redirecting Arrays is a good trait these days. This is, I forgot, like there are I think 3 ships in the Sand Store that have it. It's fire, it will extend, and every time you get hit, like, you increase the duration up to 15 seconds, and 15 seconds is the recharge of Fire at Will these days, so you can have Fire at Will permanently up, assuming you get shot a lot. If nobody wants to attack you, then this is not going to work. But I mean, if you are doing solo missions or so on, then everybody is going to shoot you. And if you're doing queues, I mean, with that damage output of this ship and the amount of AoE you throw around, I'm getting shot a lot, let's put it like this. So it works pretty well for me. And then I have Emergency Weapon Cycle, which helps my weapons. So we can now move on to the stations, and while this isn't really that much of a weapon-focused build, you can also, if you look at my power distribution, you can see I have some weapon, well, I have quite a bit of weapon power and quite a bit of auxiliary power. I currently have weapons set to 85 and auxiliary set to 85, but keep in mind that I'm also using emergency power to weapons, which will further improve the power levels in weapons, and therefore bringing them up to essentially the maximum. Now, why weapons and not auxiliary? Mostly because of emergency weapon cycle. I could instead also put a little bit more into weapons and then run emergency power to auxiliary and switch out this trait. But said, this is something that works for me. It's still like a good trait there. Now, the only tactical skill that I have is Fire at Will 1. Now, Fire at Will is obviously pretty nice because you hit a lot of targets, and all the targets you hit will get debuffed. Of course, you have to hit them with multiple damage types to get that stacking debuff. But this just works really well, right? It's all the tactical that I need is that one Fire at Will for my beams, and then everything else is built around science except for that one emergency power to weapons there. So let's talk science, because science is fun. I've already mentioned that I have these Bohr-infused anomalies, right? So gravity well is an anomaly, timeline collapse is an anomaly, chronometric inversion field is an anomaly, ionic turbulence is an anomaly, very cold in space is an anomaly, and subspace vortex is also an anomaly. So you can see I have a lot of anomalies. Now what you want to do is you want to use the temporal first, because temporals don't trigger the trait. The way Bohr-infused anomalies works is every time you use an intel or a science ability, every anomaly releases spores. So essentially you first want to start with placing the temporal anomalies, and then you want to place the science anomalies, and every science anomaly you place already triggers the existing anomalies, and then you also the intel anomaly, and then you want to spam your non-anomaly science skills or so. That would be perfecting the use of this trait. I have them on a spam bar, right? So I have basically quick binds to fire up all of those things one after another, and I'm not going to perfectly time this all the time. It still works fine, trust me, but it's too much work to fire off everything perfectly. Also keep in mind that I want to, for example, fire my second reflector whenever it's ready, well, or the skills that trigger my second reflector, which brings us to destabilizing resonance beam and structural analysis. Now those two skills both trigger by the second reflector, right? And then of course for unconventional systems, well, gravity well, shockwave, tractor beam, those are all triggering unconventional systems, so does ionic turbulence and all of my temporal skills as well. That's why I have Heisenberg Amplifier 1 there. It's only there for the unconventional systems trigger, and this is a skill with a very short cooldown, so this is a very good uncon. So yeah, I have essentially a lot of anomalies. I have things to trigger my secondary deflector, and I have my uncon triggers, right? Yeah, so let's take this beauty into a mission and see how it goes. Okay, for demonstration purposes, this is going into an elite Agala. Not really a very hard patrol also. I mean, it is on elite, right? But you can see how I think it's still a demonstration on how ship. If I take this into infected, which is the usual benchmark, of course there are quite a few problems with only benchmarking infected and specifics to that map, but I've done like 700, 800,000 or so with this setup. But as I said, you know, infected has its problems. But this ship performs really well. Now, let's give the Bentons start by buffing a little bit, and then then they dead. Just use the teleports here to lower the cooldown. Now I do have to wait until the red alert ends until we can continue this. And you can see all of those blue novas. Those are all spore-infused anomalies. And now we're gonna throw out the Soul Scream Vortex, and we're gonna throw out more science abilities. It's all pretty shiny, but I guess that's just how science is.
You will stand down and surrender to the Vented Guard. Sensors are picking up small habitations in some of the astral, possibly consistent with Volk'Tar's temporary hideout.
Give them a good old flamethrower treatment.
We do what we want, where we want. Picked up a tight beam transmission on a new frequency. We're jamming that spectrum on their comms now, but it was probably a call for assistance. I'm taking you with me.
I don't think they're taking me with them.
That's got it. Excellent work. We'll send over a
Excellent work.
take the suspect into custody.
So this is my science build here. Now a similar build would work on a lot of free science ships with the similar specializations.
Thank you for your assistance, and welcome to this sector.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. Once again, keep in mind that this ship is shiny. And you might need sunglasses if you travel a lot on full impulse. But other than that, it's a beauty. The console is a fun console. It's not the most damaging one, mind you, but it's a very powerful gravity well. So if you need a gravity well on any ship, you can't just throw this console on. Or if you want a second gravity well on any ship. So there is that. Now I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.